Hello, welcome. My name's Martin. I want to tell you my story. Why? Because I don't have any kids, so I don't have any children to tell the story to. Although I've got some nephews, they know my story in snippets, but I want to kind of capture it for prosperity, really. And if anybody wants to research me long after I've gone, then they can check out YouTube, and you can see or hear my history, about being Jewish, and about my story, my journey, if you like. My name's Martin. My mother and father. My mother is Jewish. My father's Irish Catholic. And my great grandparents came to England in 1905. My grandmother told me that they were on a boat destined for New York, because they were fleeing pogroms. We were never able. My uncle researched them, but the records in the synagogues had basically been burnt, and so they couldn't really discover any other family members. Although somewhere along the line, he was able to locate some people in America. Oddly enough, the couple who got married had the same name as me and my sister, Helen and Martin, and they had a child called Daniel, which happens to have been brother's name. Very strange, very weird. But their name was Labor. I believe it was shortened to Labor. But my great grandmother's maiden name was McCloskowicz, and that's it. They were set sail for New York, and they found themselves at Liverpool docks. They were told it was New York, and so they disembarked and found themselves in England. They settled in Liverpool, and eventually gave birth to several sons. I know one of them was called Louis. I never met him, but and two daughters. My Auntie Rose, my great Auntie Rose, and my grandmother, Hannah. Her name was Hannah Labor. She eventually found her way to Birmingham, married my grandfather, Harry Wittenberg, who changed his name from Wittenberg to Witten. It's anglicised, to make it kind of fit in. So he was Harry Witten, and my grandmother was Hannah Witten. And they had two children, my Uncle David, who passed away, Aliyah Journey, and my mother passed away in 2009, Aliyah Journey. And they both married out. My mother met my father in Birmingham. He was an immigrant into England, travelled around a bit, and found his way to Birmingham, and he ended up getting a job on the demolition, knocking buildings down. And there's a couple of stories that I've been told about how they met, but the one consistent story, the one that comes up often, is that my dad tells me that he was on a lift shaft, the top of a lift shaft in the top of a building that was being demolished with another Irish fella with sledgehammers, and they were knocking down the pause for a minute. That's better. You'll be able to hear me better now. They were knocking down a lift shaft, and unbeknownst to them, my mother was on the other side of the road at a bus stop, and as they knocked the lift shaft down, the whole lot went down, and my dad and this other fellow went down with it, down the middle of the lift shaft. It was a hotel they were knocking down on the top end of, I think it was Corporation Street in Birmingham, an old hotel. Beautiful hotel, apparently. I've seen pictures of it since. However, they brought him out. He survived it, and they brought him out on a stretcher. And my mum was very concerned. She ran across the road, and she went with him in the ambulance. It's typically my mum, and and they got it together. And of course, I came along, and I think it was possibly and probably, looking back at it, it was probably a boucher for my grandmother, a shame. Although she readily accepted him, but probably felt anxious and regret, and that she'd made a mistake somewhere along the line. But essentially, my mum married out, and I came along. Then my sister, and then my brother, my younger brother. There's an 8-year gap between me and my brother, and only 15 months gap between me and my sister. But anyway, my earliest memories are of my grandmother sort of turning up on a Friday afternoon when I was like at least two years old. I remember she would turn up with a packet of chocolate buttons on a Friday afternoon, barge into the house, as grandmothers do, take possession and control of everything. She'd sit me in the kitchen sink and scrub me down while she was cooking a pot of chicken soup. Get me dressed and ready for bed. I'd have my chicken soup, go to bed, and then my nan would go home. That's why she'd go home to do her chicken soup. I remember that happening quite a lot on a Friday afternoon. I used to love looking forward to it because of the chocolate buttons and your bubba. Why not? I remember she used to turn up in a green van, and it was the greengrocer, and his name was Terry. He used to give her a lift. Amazing what you remember. Anyway, my nan was a big influence in my life, a major influence. We used to go and stay at hers as I grew. As I got a bit older, we used to stay at hers on a Friday night, and we'd go to shul with her. She'd pick us up from Hebrew school, went to King David in Birmingham. She was a big part of my life because my mum was always working, trying to earn a crust to pay our way. My dad was always at work, so my nan was a kind of like a babysitter. But she was your grandmother, you didn't know any difference. You just spent most of the time with her. And looking back at it, I think she probably had regrets, and she thought that she had to basically influence us or mould us in some way for fear of us marrying out, because she constantly kept us, not my sister, but certainly me and my brother eventually, making us promise to her that we would never marry out, over and over and over again. Promise, promise, promise. That's why I'm still single. I refuse to marry out. But that's kind of the background. When we were at King David, 1973 came along, and the Yom Kippur War, and a fair few families in Birmingham left and made Aliyah. And one of the families, the Krupp family of Birmingham, had a daughter called Sharon, and Helen, my sister, and Sharon were best friends, and so they carried on writing to each other as pen pals. I remember a letter coming through every 5 minutes for my sister. Where's my letter? Why does Helen keep getting a letter? It's because she took the time out to write. I was so tum-tum, I was so childlike, even up to the age of 40. Still a child, even now. She kept in touch with Sharon, and eventually it was time for Sharon to go into the army, and her parents paid for her to come back to England for a month, and she came and stayed at our house. I was kind of forewarned about it, but I didn't pay any attention or take any notice. And when she arrived, it was like, hi, I'm going out to play football. And that was it. And she was around for about a month. I didn't really engage with her. I didn't really talk to her. I wasn't interested. I just wanted to play football. That was when I was about 16, 17, and no, 17. I think I was coming up to my 18th birthday, for sure I was. I had a market stall, and I sold haberdashery, the stuff that you kind of see in the background there. And on her last day, she came to say goodbye. I saw her in the distance. I even tried to hide. But she'd seen me, so I couldn't. So I just stood there thinking, what do I say? What do you say to her? You know, it wasn't me and girls at that time. Like, she was just like another sister, you know, and I didn't really want to know. That's how ignorant I was, childlike. Suddenly she was there in front of me, in front of the stall, and I was talking to her. I didn't know what to say. So I said, I remember saying, so how's Israel then? I think I said that. How's Israel? It was like an interesting inquiry to make after she'd lived in our house for a month. And whatever she said, I don't know what she said, whatever answer was. But after she left, I was inspired or compelled to go. And I ran down to a telephone box and rang up a friend who I hadn't spoken to for a year, we'd fallen out. And I said to him, I'm going to Israel. Do you want to come? Now, at that time, about 6 months before that, we had a friend who had gone to a kibbutz in Israel called Kibbutz near Oz, which is down by Gaza. I didn't really pay any interest. I wasn't really interested in Israel at the time because I was ignorant of it. I really didn't know much about it. All I remember is my grandmother screaming at the TV a lot and calling us down, Israel's on the telly, Israel's on the telly, and we'd come running down to watch the TV news, and a lot of it would go over my head. Every Yom Ha'atzmaut, I remember the teachers turning up with a crate of Jaffa oranges at school. And that was, because I went to a non-Jewish secondary school, there was a bit of a disconnect, but whilst I was at junior school at King David in Birmingham, you know, I was synchronised with all the festivals, went to shul every Shabbos. But as soon as my bar mitzvah came, that was it, I was finished. I was off with my mates. They all were all the same, you know, chasing girls and that kind of thing. And there were so few Jewish girls in Birmingham that we were all looking at the non-Jewish girls, you know. Anyway, so all my friends married out. Because I promised my nan I never would. I never did. And because there's no Jewish girls in Birmingham, I never got married. But anyway, I decided to go, and I asked my mate if he wanted to come with me, and he said yes. So 3 weeks later, we were on a flight to Israel. So excited. I remember, you know, both of our mothers, his mother was divorced, my mother was divorced by then, seeing us off on the coach in the centre of Birmingham. I think it was off to Heathrow. It was the first time I'd ever flown. And I'll never ever forget how I felt when I flew over Tel Aviv. Because in my head, I'd got it that I was going to see people on camels and desert. That's what I thought, you know, because they used to say things like, you know, they made the desert bloom. So I used to think I was going to see desert. And I couldn't believe it when I saw this metropolis underneath me. It just blew me away. Anyway, we, as I said, we'd had this friend in a kibbutz near us. And somehow my friend's mother, David's mother, had got in touch with my other friend's mother, the one that was on the kibbutz, Martin, and got the details of that kibbutz, and she'd given it to her son, David, the kibbutz near us, it's on a bit of paper, back of an envelope kind of thing. So we landed in Tel Aviv. We stayed at Sharon's house that night. She took us to the beach, and the next morning she took us to the kibbutz office in Tel Aviv, Allenby Street, I think, or Dizengoff, or something like that. I can't remember. But we were at the kibbutz office, signed up, and we came out, and she said, "No, where are they sending you?" And we handed her the paper, and she looked at it and said, "Oh no, you are not." And she stormed straight through us, and went into the office and told them, "These boys are Jewish. What are you doing?" I said, "Oh, why didn't they say?" Of course, I didn't have a Jewish name. David did, but he'd given them the details of the kibbutz where our friend was staying, which was kibbutz near us. And so they said, "Okay, we'll change this." So they sent us to kibbutz Kinneret, up in the Galilee. Of course, I didn't know where it was. I didn't know what it was about. I had no knowledge of it at all. And we found ourselves on a bus at Tel Aviv bus station. I'll never forget it. I remember seeing my very first asimonim, a little coin for the telephone box with a hole in it. We were joking about it being like a polo, a Jewish polo, polo mint. We got on the bus, and David had bought a packet of garinim, little seeds, and we sat next to each other and surrounded by these other kids. They were all in kind of casual clothing, but we didn't realise that they were all together. Even though they were all talking to each other, there was in a different language, we were just all going over our head because we'd never really heard fluent Hebrew before. So we just didn't pay any attention. We just looked out the window, and David basically was nibbling away at these garinim, and he was getting on okay with it, and eating them. Me, I was struggling with them. So what I did, I was nibbling these garinim, and I built up a pile in my hand. I was covered in a mess from it, you know how it goes. So I didn't know what to do. So I said to my friend David, I said, "Hold these for me while I clean myself down before I eat them." So I put them into his hand, a whole pile of prepped garinim, and he just ate the lot in one go, because he was like that. And all these other Israeli kids around us burst out laughing, because they were watching us, we didn't realise, and they just couldn't. I just thought it was such a chutzpah that what he'd done to me. Of course, I was angry and annoyed because I spent an hour nibbling away at these blooming things. And and in fact, I've never had any since then. I refused to eat them. And we got talking to these guys. They said, "Where are you going?" And we told them kibbutz. We showed them the paper. They said, "Oh, Annas." So you said, "You get off the same bus with us, the bus stop with us." And we stopped at the top of this hill. We had these rucksacks underneath the bus. We sort of got down the steps, and everyone's fighting, and because you're anxious to get your stuff off the bus before it goes, and the bus compartment, the baggage compartment, is rammed with rucksacks and bags, and you've got to find yours and get it off. So I was so anxious to find it and get it. Eventually, I found it and turned around, and I saw the most beautiful picture I've ever seen in my life. Now, I have to tell you about this picture. When I was bar mitzvahed, there was a friend of my grandmother's had also made Aliyah, and she was invited to my bar mitzvah, and she came over, and she bought me a book called The Israel I Love. And when you open the inside cover, there's a famous picture of the view of the Kinneret, right? And I recognised this picture because I was standing more or less in the same spot where this picture had been taken. And it was like a massive slap across the face, because in that moment I felt as if I was fulfilling or living some kind of destiny. I was meant to be there to see it. I was meant to get that book. Anyway, we walked down into the kibbutz, signed up and became volunteers on the kibbutz. A few months later, we decided to go down to kibbutz to visit my friend. And if you've ever been down there, you'll know that the differences between the two areas just can't be compared. It's like barren desert down there with brush all over the place and hot like you wouldn't believe, and full of flies. And I thought, no, this I could never have settled down on that kibbutz. Just didn't like it at all. The Kinneret was for me, it was green, it was lush, it was paradise. They had the Lake Kinneret. It was just wonderful, a different kind of humidity. And I went back to the kibbutz Kinneret, and my mate David stayed down there with our other friend.
And that was that. As time went by, I decided to make Aliyah. And I was conflicted because I didn't have any money and I didn't have any family there. And I found it very distressing to keep thinking about it. And so I concluded that the best thing for me to do was to come back when I was 50. I deferred it, I kicked the decision down the road. And after that, I felt okay. Anyway, that was how I kind of ended up in Israel for the first time. Many years later, I went again with my brother and his friends, and I took a manager with me who I worked with. We went on a trip to Israel, a couple of weeks, and I reaffirmed my belief that I was going to be there, you know, that I was going to make Aliyah. I was probably about 30 something then, I think. And still had like time to go, you know. But eventually, time sort of unfolded, and I found myself at the eve of the internet, 1996. I was the first time I got on the internet. I was kind of an early adopter. I embraced it very quickly. And one of the first things that I did when I got on the internet was to search for properties in Israel to buy. And I found this website called buypropertyinisrael.com. And I used to log on every day and look at this property. It was a 3-bedroomed apartment in Tiberias, and it was $35,000. And it was the only one in Tiberias that was available on this website. And I used to look at it every day and talk about it all the time. And I even persuaded my brother-in-law to go 50-50 with me, because in those days I wasn't earning much money. I was buying a house anyway, so things were tight, but I thought at a push, if I went 50-50 with my brother-in-law, we'd have a holiday home kind of thing to share. And he was up for it, but we never did anything. But I carried on looking at this property every day, obsessed with it. Eventually, about 10 years went by, and I picked up some courage. My financial position had changed as well. I was earning more money. And I picked up some courage to inquire about this property. I thought, $35,000, it's a bargain, man. I've got to buy it. It wasn't just that it was a bargain. I could afford it. That was the thing. I could afford it. I could buy it on my own case, on my own right, on my own account. And so eventually I picked up the courage to make the phone call, because it was bothering me so much. I just had to basically have it. I needed to do something. And so the obvious thing to do was to phone them. But how do you communicate with English and Hebrew? And I knew a bit of Hebrew by then, but not enough to hold a conversation. I could say some basic things like shalom and Martin and Imi Anglia. And then the rest is English. You know, I have to speak in English. So I rang up this guy. His name was Moshe Cohen. He was a vet. Got a damaged leg from one of the conflicts. I didn't know that at the time when I was speaking to him. But I rang him up and I said, "How do you speak English?" He said, "Ken." Yes. I said, "Oh, great." I said, I told him who it was, where I was calling from, and I said, "You've got a property on the website." And I described it and quoted the price. He said, "Oh," he said, "that one." He said, "That sold 10 years ago." 10 years ago. I said, "Why?" I said, "Why didn't you take it down?" And he said, "I don't know how to." So I've been looking at this property every day, nearly every day, for 10 years. It really did my head in. Can you imagine? I was like disappointed at that. What? I guess this was my real first experience of Israeli administration. And I told him that I'd been looking at it every day for 10 years. And how it made me feel and that. And he said, "Well, don't worry about it." He says, "Come out, I'll show you some others." I said, "Okay." But of course I didn't appreciate that between the time that property sold and where I was making the inquiry 10 years later, the property prices had like tripled. Because there was no other property, no other source of information at that time. So when I got out to Israel and he showed me around some properties, I realised that I didn't have enough money. Or I could take on the commitment, but I would probably be stretched, you know. But regardless, it showed me 2 or 3 properties, and it was very kind of him to do that. And he was trying to persuade me to actually consider a brand new build that he was going to be building, not far from his office. That building eventually was built, and at the time I think he was talking about 700,000 shekel for a 4-bedroom brand new apartment. It was too much for me then. I was looking at sort of sub 500,000 shekel, you know, and I think probably under 100 grand I was looking at, but this property was more about 160, 170. Now you're probably looking at 2.5 million shekel for sure. I should have bought it, but I'm not the type to actually commit myself to something that I can't afford. I'm not that type. And I came back to England, had to reevaluate and get some more money together. Time went by, and pressure was building because I was kind of like circa 50 years old already, and or approaching 50. I was mid-50s, mid-40s, sorry. And the 50 was approaching, and I'd been telling everybody for years that I basically was, by the time I'm 50, I'm going to be in Israel. You wait and see, you know. Of course, 50 came and went. I'm still here. I'm 60 now. But I felt the pressure building. I thought, I've got to do something. I've got to get ready. I've got to basically buy a proper, because I could never go and make Aliyah without having a place to land. I needed a property to move into. And so I went back out again, and I'd had another look, but it wasn't a proper tour of properties, kind of a wasted visit. So I came back to England again, and I thought, I've got to do this properly. But by then I discovered Yad, and I started doing my research on that. On there was quite a few properties for sale. I kept making inquiries, sending off messages. I spent most of my time doing Google walks, trying to locate exactly and precisely where these properties were from the street. You know, you can kind of walk along on a Google map. I became a bit of an expert at using it, and became very familiar with the road system, where the areas were. Eventually I located a property in what they call Shikon Aleph. It was a small area on the edge of Tiveria, that was built in, I think, 52 for Algerian Jews, or Tunisian Jews, that was it, Tunisian Jews, the first wave of Tunisian Jews that came over, and they settled there. Dati, Haredi area. And there was a 1-bedroom apartment, and it was about 330,000 shekel, about £60,000 at the time. And I could certainly afford to pay for it cash and have some money left over. I made contact with the agent. She couldn't really speak any English, but she knew exactly which property I was talking about. So I arranged to view it, booked another ticket, flew out. After, you know, several conversations on the phone, you know, telling them I'm coming, I eventually arrived at their office, and they didn't know anything about it. They didn't know anything about me arriving. The office was closed, basically. So I managed to phone the manager, and he said, "Oh, we didn't think you were serious." I said, "Well, I'm here." So he was good enough, golden, came down, picked me up, and took me up this road, Toledano Street, and we went straight past the property. And I said, no, there it is, it's there. Because I'd walked up and down this Google map thousands of times, just looking at the same pictures over and over again. I knew precisely where it was. He said, "I don't know anything about that one. It's not on our books." I said, I saw it on your website. It's on your website. "Sorry, it might be, but I don't know anything about it. I'm going to show you another one." Couldn't believe it. Took me round the back to another property, and that was 550,000 shekel, and it was fantastic. It was a 2-room apartment, and underneath they'd built a granny flat, and the owner had passed away, and the inheritors were living in America, and an owner, or the cost of maintaining it, was rising, and they just wanted to get out and sell it. They wanted 550,000, but the problem was that the granny flat underneath was illegal. It had been built without planning permission, so I'd have to demolish one wall or something like that. And I just thought it was a bit too awkward for me to navigate, you know, considering that I was in England, I wasn't an Israeli, I was a UK citizen. And I had to let it go. Big mistake, I should have bought it. It was a fantastic property. I mean, fantastic. For the money. And I could have afforded it. It would have been a push. I wouldn't have had much money left, but nevertheless, I should have bought it. And I came back to England disappointed, basically, not knowing what to do. Time went by again, saw other properties, made contact with an agent called Alon Golan. The first thing I told him, because I started to get a bit of arthritis on my knees, is that I don't want to basically have loads of steps. Because one agent that I spoke to, he said to me, listen, I said, I can't talk to you for very long, but let me tell you something. You're inquiring about a property that's on the 4th floor. He said, don't bother. Don't buy anything above the 2nd floor. And I said, why is that? He said, because you'll never be able to sell it. I thought, oh, okay. Of course, I was looking at the cheapest properties, and they're always on the 3rd and the 4th floor. And it got me thinking. I thought, you know, long term, if I was to buy a property that's on the 3rd, the 2nd, 3rd, 4th floor, how will I get on if my arthritis gets any worse? So I thought, no, I better start telling good agents that I only want maximum 2nd floor. So that's how my phone calls, my inquiries opened up. I'm looking for a property no more than 2 floors up because I have arthritis. So one guy I spoke to, Alon Golan, he remembered that about me. He's got a really good memory. And several phone calls later about another property that he had, he remembered straight away. He said, this one's not for you. You want less than 2 floors. I said, yeah. I was impressed by that. You know, that he remembered. He said, I have other properties to show you. He said, come out and have a look. So I did. I went out, saw some. I wasn't too impressed with them, to be honest with you. And then COVID hit. I came back to England and COVID hit. And by now I'm getting mental health issues over it because I'm obsessed with it. I can't stop thinking about it. And it just seems so far away and so out of reach. It was making me anxious. I felt compelled to buy a property before I make Aliyah. And if I couldn't buy a property before I make Aliyah, I would never make Aliyah. And that was like doing my head in. In the meantime, my mother passed away. And I found myself having to say Kaddish for her, and I started going to shul a lot, and I was learning more and learned more. I learned about Judaism and my inheritance and my roots. The more compelled I felt to get this thing going, you know. My emunah, my belief in Hashem developed. It grew. It could be better than what it is, but nevertheless, it was greater than what it was. And I went back out again after COVID. Again, to see this Alon Golan. He had more properties to show me. Because as soon as COVID was over, that was it. I'd booked a ticket and I was flying out because I had to. I was on a mission. By now, I was compelled to get something, and he showed me 3 properties. The first one was a small 1-bedroom apartment on the front line in Tiveria. Then he showed me something else, which was right by the Rambam's Keva, but it was dark and dingy, and although it was a great location, it wasn't something that I could see myself living in. There's no view. It was a few windows. And then the third property he showed me was amazing. It was huge, right at the back of Tiveria, and it had the most amazing view, huge balcony, and a property that I could divide into 2 and rent one out. But it was over my budget. And although I could have bought it, I would have had nothing left, and that would make me feel very vulnerable. So I couldn't make up my mind. And I went back to England. I thought, what's the matter with you? You've done it again. You've done it again. And I thought, the problem here is me. I'm getting in the way. I'm in the way of this process. I need to get out of the way and just leave it in God's hands. Let him organise and arrange it. And if it goes wrong, I can blame him. This is my stupid logic that I employed. So I looked at the situation, and the first property that they showed me was on the front line, the most amazing view of the Canary. I could see the Rambam's Keva. It was a one-bedroomed apartment. It was structurally sound. It was fairly modern, on account of the fact that it was built in the 1980s, and it was affordable. It was within my budget. It was probably about, with the tax, I think it was going to cost me about £113,000. But it would meet all my criteria. It'd been a single fella, one-bedroomed apartment, living room, small balcony, little kitchen, bathroom, toilet, shower, all that kind of thing. It was a self-contained one-bedroomed apartment, and it only had 8 steps up to the apartment. Although to get to it, you had to go down about 30 steps. Because there's a car park at the top. But along the same level of where the apartment is, there was a car park at the end, and you could drive all the way around. And I thought, yeah, that's fine, that's perfect. And, you know, I can deal with those steps. As long as, you know, it was just great. I thought, that's the one. And so I got back on the phone to him, and I said, listen, I said, that first one that you showed me, the small one-bedroom apartment, I said, I want that one. Is it okay? You got to come back out again to sign the paperwork. So I thought, not a problem. I booked a flight straight away. A week later, I was there. Now, I'd arranged for all my money to be sent to Israel via Israel transfer, and I'd had to jump through a dozen hoops. I had to prove where the money came from, how I acquired it, and I had to arrange for it to be transferred to Israel Transfer, and they needed so many assurances and guarantees to make sure that the money was kosher, which I was able to do, because it was kosher. You know, I'd acquired it from a redundancy, an inheritance, savings, and so on. It was all legitimate money, you know. But I eventually managed to get the money over to Israel Transfer, but they only give you 3 months. After 3 months, if you haven't used the money, they send it you back. So I was within this 3 months window. So that was also a little bit of pressure. But I got to Israel. I found myself in the solicitor's office, the lawyer's office, and I said, I want to pay for the whole lot up front now. The cost, the purchase price, the tax, which was 8%, the lawyer's fees, your fees, and the agent's fees. Everything, all in one go, now, right? And the solicitor, the lawyer, was quite amazed by it. So he rang up the equivalent lawyer of the vendor and said he wants to exchange tomorrow, wants to purchase tomorrow. And they said, no, let's do it today. Today. He said, no, we can't do it today. It's not possible. So I had to pay $180, I think it was, for a motorbike to take the payment down to Jerusalem, because that's where he was. I said, yeah, not a problem. Just do it. I trust in Hashem. You know, you're professionals. You're going to do the right thing by me. And it went smooth as clockwork. It was fine. And I managed to buy this property for 440,000 shekel, plus the 8% tax. I think, as I said, it came out about £112,000 all in, something like that, and left me with a decent sum in my pocket as a cushion, you know, an insurance policy. Then I found out that there was a tenant in it, but I kind of knew there was a tenant in it because I'd met the tenant when I viewed it. But I got the impression, I thought he said to me that, because I asked him, I said, how long before the tenant moves out? And he said 2 months. But what he meant was, she's been in there 2 months. She's got like another 8 months to go. I didn't know that until I was signing the document, but I thought, you know, Martin, this is what Hashem wants. You're going to get rent for it anyway. You're not going to be there. That's it. You've bought the property, you've got it. You don't have to worry about it after that. So I didn't object. If I hadn't have left it in Hashem's hands, I would have objected to it and caused a balagan. And maybe lost the property. But I accepted it. That's what God wants. That's what I'm going to accept. As soon as I bought, she decided she wanted to renegotiate the tenancy, and I said, not a problem. but I'm gonna put the rent up by another 10% compensation because I'm not being able to use it. You know, you could say it was a mistake. You could say it was a good deal, but she said, no, I'm not having it. I'm not having it. And so she moved out. And so suddenly the apartment was available for me. So I kind of had to go back out again a month later to finally sign all the documentation. And when I was doing this, I saw that the local authority, the Tiveria authority, had basically announced that they were going to take in 5,000 Ukrainians. And I went on Yad Shtaim and saw that all the properties that were available for sale in Tiberias had come off the market. There was nothing available for sale. There was just a few dots on the map, nothing. And then 3 days later, everything came back on the market, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50,000 shekels more. And I got in just before. That might have been another thing that had prevented me from proceeding. So the value went up. I thought it was amazing. So when I went out to sign the documentation, I said to the guy, I said, Alon, I said, how much would you value the property at now since the Ukrainians are coming in? And he said, now, he said, why? He said, you want to sell? I said, no, not at all. I said, but how much? And he says, minimum 650,000 shekel, minimum. He said, you can't get anything in Tiveria for under 650 at that time. I couldn't believe it. So it had gone up from 440 to 650 in the space of 4 weeks. That was incredible. So I thought, Baruch Hashem, thank you very, very much, you know. Anyway, in the meantime, I was able to take possession of the property. So I went back out again. And that week, on my last day of that visit, I'm watching something on Facebook, because I've joined a few Tiveria books groups, and I'm watching something like a little mini video of a woman in front of a presentation, in front of a lot of old people in Tiberias, and they all had headsets on. I couldn't understand that. So I unmuted it and listened to what was being said, and also I couldn't understand what was being said. But you know, you can do the translate, and it basically said, she was basically had an artist impression of Brenner Street. I could read Brenner because I was familiar with the word Brenner now. Brenner, that was the road I was living on. That's where the home is. So I recognised Brenner. That's what caught my attention originally, because I saw it was something to do with Brenner Street. And it was an artist impression of high-rise blocks of flats, a whole row of them, a whole row, about 10 of them, and Tel Aviv style, 44-storey high blocks of flats on Brenner Street. And all these people that were sitting there listening to her were Russians, Russian Olim that couldn't speak Hebrew, and she's doing a presentation to them, and it's being translated into Russian for her, and she's basically saying that the government or the local authority have decided to knock the whole lot down on a panui thing. And usually they're organised block by block, but because these apartments are cut into the side of the mountain, the only way that they're going to be able to do them block by block is if they were to demolish them in sequence. And so, since there were dafkas in some of these blocks, they could say, no, never own my dead body. It became a compulsory purchase. They didn't have a choice in the matter. The whole lot's coming down. I think a lot of it is to do with making the properties earthquake proof, getting density, and just generally giving Tiberias a refresh, because it's a lot of old buildings, and the Tiberias as a city just hasn't attracted inward investments because it's a Likud town historically, and Likud took the vote for granted, so they didn't invest. And when they weren't in power, the opposition were, they didn't invest in the city because it was a Likud town, you know, and it was that kind of thing. And so it kind of like deteriorated over time. So anyway, they decided to knock all these blocks down. I thought it was amazing. Not only have I bought a property that's gone up in value, it's got panui on it. I thought amazing. So in the meantime, I'll just sit back and wait for that to happen. One of my subsequent visits was at a Shabbos meal, and the the fellow of the house, he kind of keeps his ear to the ground, but the wife doesn't. But she doesn't want them knocked down. She says, "This is my home. I don't want it knocked down." I'm for it, you know, because on a Benui scheme, you get an extra room, you know, and I can understand that there's going to be some objection to it, but I also like the idea of the progress. You get like a brand new apartment, brand new modern apartment with a bomb shelter inside it. I don't know what they call them. You'll have a balcony and an extra room, so I'll end up with a 2-bedroom apartment, in theory. I've just got to sit back and wait and see. But in the meantime, this Shabbos lunch, this guy's telling me that they'd already started at the top of Brenner Street, and they're about to knock down 3 blocks. They're only like 4-story high, these blocks, but they were going to replace it with this first 44-story high block of flats. But the people behind objected, because on the next ledge up the mountain, they objected. They said they're going to ruin my view. I think they're going to do the same on the next ledge, all the way up, but they're going to stagger these buildings, so anybody that's sort of behind will still maintain their view. That's what I think they're going to do. But they put it on hold because of this complaint, this objection that they're going to lose their views. So that's sort of kind of been in the courts, and it will be resolved because it's the local authority that are driving it through. So I would imagine that the law is going to be on their side somewhat. And they probably need the development because of the extra density and the revenue that it will give them, you know. And since it's on the front row, it's on the front row of Tiberias, I've since learned that all the industrial area in front of me, it's all going to be cleared. These, you know, the little small garages that change tyres and small little shacks that basically sell fruit and veg, or somebody that sells beds or something like that. All the lot is going to be cleared, and it's all going to be shifted to a brand new estate at the back of Tiberias and a new commercial zone. And the whole downtown area is going to be replaced with leisure and accommodation hotels to accommodate the tourist sector. Because after COVID, a lot of Israelis went to Turkey and Cyprus and Greece, and people were asking the question, why are they coming to Tiberias? And it's because they can't accommodate the volume of people. There just aren't enough hotel accommodation. So prices are high for what it is, and consequently people are comparing the cost and saying it's cheaper to go to Cyprus. So the government sent a delegation out to review the matter, and they're pouring billions of shekels into the area. And since I've bought, which is now 3 years, I think, I'm situated in an area called Kiryat Moshe, and across the road I can see the other neighbourhood, which is Kiryat Shmuel. And when I first went there, I counted about 10 high-rise blocks being built. Last time I was there, it was 35, and many of them have been completed in the last. Even during the war, they've completed them. I don't know how they've done that, but the building is insane, and what's going on in Tiberias, insane. There's about 50,000 residents in Tiberias, and they're looking to double that. So it's going to have about 100,000 people, and I think they're going to try and put a railway network. There's talk of it. They're saying that if they can put a railway between Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, they can certainly put a railway connection between Tiberias and Carmiel, because the main line is going to go through Carmiel all the way up to Kiryat Shmona, but there'll be some kind of like spur or branch off to Tiberias somehow. They'll have to go down a mountain, basically. Or the train station will be at the top of the mountain, and those that want to go to get a train and work in Tel Aviv or something, they'll have to have a 10, 15, 20-minute commute to the train station, something like that, I would imagine. But some of the challenges that I had along the way was like the bank account. The difficulty I had was navigate. Simple thing really would hold you back. Now, not a problem now, but at the time it was, and it was what I call the IVR system, the interactive voice recognition system. You know, when you make a telephone call and it says they press 1 for customer service, 2 for accounts, and 3. was all in Hebrew. I couldn't understand what they were saying. So you'd make a phone call and you'd press all the different buttons and get through to somebody. It'd be an Israeli who also couldn't speak Hebrew. Until I started using Skype to make the phone call, because it's a lot cheaper on Skype. You put some credit on Skype and you can use it to dial not only a mobile phone to a mobile phone, but more importantly, you could do a mobile phone to a landline. That was the important thing about Skype. If you use WhatsApp, you couldn't do it at the time from a mobile phone to a landline. You could only do it from WhatsApp to WhatsApp, or WhatsApp to a desktop, but you couldn't do the normal regular telephone system. But Skype you could. So I kept making these phone calls and pressing these buttons, and I wasn't getting anywhere until one day Skype introduced the first basic AI. It was voice recognition. It was not voice, it was more than voice recognition. It was voice translation. It would translate from English to Hebrew and Hebrew to English. You just had to select the option when you made the phone call, which I did one day, and I said yes. And then all of a sudden I could see, then the second option was text or voice. So I pressed both and I could read and hear in English at the same time. It was translating it basically. And it got to the option 3, and if you want to speak to an English one, press 3. I thought, that's the one. And I got through to this kid who picked up the phone and spoke English. Wonderful. That was with Bank Hapoalim, right, in Ramat Gan. And I had a lovely, wonderful chat with this kid. And I told him what my challenge was. He said, not a problem, mate. Not a problem, mate. He said, I'm going to transfer you through to the Haifa branch now. And before he did that, he picked up the phone and spoke to the Haifa banker, confirmed that he was going to transfer me before he did, and he transferred me through, and I ended up speaking to this banker, and I was able to basically book an appointment. And on my the subsequent visit, I was able to go and sit in front of them, and they opened up the bank account for me. And the reason why I needed to do it at the time was because the money that I transferred to Israel via Israel Transfer was greater than the purchase price of the property. So I had about £10,000 left in cash, in shekels, and it needed to go somewhere. Otherwise, they'd convert it back into sterling and send it back to me in England. So I really needed a bank account. So here I am. I find myself sitting in a main branch in Haifa, with this. She was Russian descent, or no, she was Russian. She could speak Hungarian, English and Hebrew. And I had to sit there for about an hour while she filled in all these forms, loads and loads of forms, because I wasn't an Israeli citizen. I was classed as a UK investor. So I've no idea. I can gain access to the account on the internet, but it's kind of all in Hebrew, although it will translate into English now. I just haven't looked at it for 3 years. Although every year they phone me up to say, do you realise you've got some money in the account? So yeah. And they tell me exactly what I've got. And the most recent, I've been paying the bills out of it, you see. I've been paying the electric, the Arnona. I think that's the electric and the Arnona. That's all the only bills I've really got. Oh, the water. Yeah, those 3 things, which I need to tell you about in a minute. They tell me, this is what you've got in shekels, and am I getting any interest on it? No. So I've got to get some interest, and they've suggested that I now can transfer that bank account to a Bank Hapoalim in Tiveria, which I want to do, and they're prepared to give me a bank card so I can draw my money out, which I really need, because every time I go there, I take sterling with me, and yet I've got these shekels. But the interesting thing is that the value of the shekels is now £11,000. It's gone up £1,000 in 3 years. And I've still been paying all these bills, Thank you. What can you say? Anyway, in the meantime, I had to get the utilities sorted. I didn't get gas, even though there's gas into the apartment. I haven't used it because it's just not necessary for the amount of time that I'm there. I'm only there periodically, so until I make full Aliyah. And I've been going backwards and forwards twice a year. And kitting the place out. But one of the first things that I had to do early on was basically get the electric switched over to my name, the Arnona and the water. And I managed to do the Arnona and the water on the same day in the space of about 3 hours. and without any Israeli ID or anything. And I remember going, thinking to myself, well, somebody had basically saw that I was seeking to do this, and he volunteered to drive me around, to help me out. Scottish guy. I thought, great, don't have to do anything. He'll just take me to the offices and I'll do it. And on the morning that I'm sitting there waiting for him to come pick me up, and he rings up to say he can't come. That is, he didn't tell his wife, and she's disappointed in him, and he doesn't know who I am and all that kind of thing, and he's going to have to decline. I thought, oh, great. Could have told me the previous day, so I could have arranged something. So I'm finding myself stuck up a creek. So I thought, I know what I'll do. I'll go to the council office. So I did a search on the council office, found out where it was, and sort of marched up the hill, only to discover that they don't do it there. But somebody was kind of explaining to me in Hebrew where I've got to go, kept pointing in a certain direction, which was back down the hill into the city. So along this journey, I just stopped and kept asking people, Onona, Mayim. So that was the wrong thing to say, where's the water? Because they would point to the lake. So I started saying, where's the Onona? And they kept pointing down, further down. By now, my feet are killing me, because I must have walked 20,000 steps. Eventually, I found myself in this office, this mini shopping mall on the edge of Tiveria. And I've gone in there, relaxed for a bit, got myself a coffee, asked around, and they sent me up this lift. And I found myself in a lift, right, with a young lady. And I was asking her, I was speaking in English. I was trying to basically inquire in Hebrew. And she was sort of a bit off with me. She was dati, and she was a little bit distant. And then she kind of switched. Something switched in her head, and she became very friendly and helpful. And she was American. She was American, because she sat there just listening to me. You know, she wasn't answering. And I thought, okay, fair enough. You don't want to be an answer. You know what I mean? That's what I was. And then she did. She started helping me. And I got into the beginning of the office, and she said to me, you said you go to that machine there and get a number, you know, a ticket, and join the queue. So I went to the machine. It's all in Hebrew, and it's asking for your national insurance number or something like that, which I don't have. I think they're Tudashlish or something like that. I don't know what it's called. And I went back to her and I said, I'm not an Israeli, so I don't have the card. I don't have a ID, Israeli ID. I say, any lo Israeli, any Anglit, you know. She said, go over to the manager's office over there. So I went into the manager. The door was open, and there's a lady in there, jet black hair, with a suit on, and her head's down on the desk, and she's writing. And I've knocked on the door, and she's, Ken! And I thought, she's not going to look at me. I haven't got her attention. She's occupied with something else. So I thought, I've got to get her attention. You know what I mean? So I said, Malka Shali. That got her attention. Head straight up. Huh? Because I figured that half these Israeli women don't get any affection from the husbands. You know what I mean? And, you know, I'm kind of one of the biggest flirts going out. But, my queen, I need help. She got out of a chair and she walked towards me. And I said, in my broken Hebrew, I said, Ani Martin, Ani mi Anglia, Aval Ani lo Israeli, Aval Achshav yesh bayit berechov Brenner. I'm Martin, I'm English, I'm not from England, I'm not Israeli, but I've got a property on Brenner Street, right? And she said, no. I said, but I can't get the ticket. And she said, Beseda. And she went over and she keyed in a number and gave me the ticket, and she took me to the front of the queue to a couple, an older woman and a younger kid, a younger girl, sitting there side by side doing something. I can't remember what. And she started speaking to them fluent in Hebrew, and she said, sit. Shev, sit. And next thing I know, that these girls have these women have put these books to one side and started to talk to me. And the reason why she took me to these couples, because the kid was like an intern. She was like a school leaver that just started the job. And she said to them something like that this is an opportunity for her to learn something quite special, how to deal with a non-Israeli who's got a property here. It was like a unique situation. So the woman was quite glad of the chance to teach this kid how to deal with somebody like me. So I sat there for about 10 minutes and they gave me all these forms. And interestingly, the woman who was behind the counter, the older woman, she couldn't speak great English, but the kid could. So she was translating to the kid, and the kid was basically telling me in English what to do. And they gave me a form, and it was a direct debit form. She said, go to bank, go to bank. And I said, okay. So I went to the bank, Bank Upper William, and I had to go through the same process again because I didn't have any ID. And eventually I found myself sitting with a banker in the Tiveria branch. I was able to explain. Now my confidence is rising and I'm using Hebrew a bit more, a little bit more fluent, a little bit more direct. I'm realising what it is you've got to be with them. You've got to be persistent. And I was able to explain, and she saw that I had this direct debit form, and that all she needed to do was set it up against my bank account that I'd got in Haifa. So she did it, she worked it out, and I used the same strategy. I said to her, Malka Shali, use this, it's great. I think it works if you're a fella. And you're a woman, you want to use it if you're a woman as well. Malka Shali, they love it. They love it. They melt. There's like a hard exterior, and as soon as you like call them my queen, it's like, you think so? I figured that they don't get any affection from the husbands myself. I already said that. But anyway, in the meantime, she filled in the form for me, set it all up, and then she gave me another form, and I had to go back to the iron owner office. This time I didn't have to queue. I went straight in, I gave them the form, they set it all up. And that was the iron owner sorted. Brilliant. Amazing. Now I had to do the water. So now I had to go and find the water office. And what I didn't realise is that the water office is downstairs. Amazing. I thought, wow, what a clever thing to do. The iron owner office and the water office in the same building. So I went down to the water office and I went through the same process. And they gave me the form, and I had to go back to the bank again, get it set up, and then go back and deal with the water. And that was it. It was done. And I told people, and they can't believe it. They said, you got that done in an afternoon? I said, yeah. I said, it takes some of them, it takes months and months because of the language barriers and probably maybe a bit of few attitude problems here and there on both sides, you know. My advice is, Malka Shali, Malka. Use that. It works a treat. So I use it in every shop I go into now. I do it, and it gets their attention. It breaks. I find it breaks a barrier. I think it's either you are trying to engage with them in Hebrew, or it's the compliment that they don't normally get. Because I don't think it's a given thing in Israel or in Judaism to actually pay compliments to the extent where it's false, if you know what I mean. But I'm doing it with a little bit of tongue in cheek, and I suppose they look at me and think, who's this chutzpah? Calling me Malka, you know? Anyway, I do it, and it works. And that's my advice, basically. Be persistent, be a bit dafkanik, and don't give in, and use a little bit of schmooze. I think it goes some way, you know? But now I've already been out. I go out there every Christmas because for me, it's the best time for me to close my business down because I'm an online business. I send all my stuff out through the post, and the Royal Mail sort of closes down over the bank holidays, and there's a few bank holidays over that period. So I close my business down and I go out for about 10 to 15 days over the Christmas period, and I'm going back out in Purim this time as well in a couple of weeks' time. The last I think about four, I lose track now, about 4 visits. I've managed to kit out my apartment. The last visit, I got myself a fridge and a washing machine. That was good. I got myself a hot plate. I got myself a nice armchair, table and chairs. My next visit, I'm going to get myself a nice sort of lounge settee, L-shaped lounge settee, and maybe a rug and a bookcase. Because I'm going to start taking my Sepharim over with me, and I want to, start building up. Transferring my collection of Gemorot and Mishnah and all that kind of thing. But it's kind of been an interesting journey, challenging, and I'm absolutely certain, 1,000%, that Hashem's been with me all the way, right from the day that Sharon came to see me, on my market stall, and a switch went in my head, and I found myself on Kibbutz Kinneret. If you've ever been there, you'll understand what I mean. As far as the city is concerned, you know, somebody once described it as the armpit of Israel. I can understand why, because it's kind of been neglected and the properties are weathered and it's not modern. But that's not the case now. It's changing rapidly. There's a lot of investment. At the top of Tiveria, there's a shopping mall, a shopping precinct that's been open about 15 years already now. I remember looking on the map. You look on the Google map and it's like a kind of a square, you know, and you've got a kind of, it's an out-of-town shopping mall. Now they're building a big football stadium a bit further down the road and another neighbourhood down there. But the last time I was there, I was shocked. Absolutely shocked by what I saw. Because I'd been around this shopping mall once before and it was just like a shopping mall on its own in the middle of nowhere. The last time I went, there must be thousands upon thousands of apartments all the way around it. And apparently some Haredi developer had bought the land and he built these properties for Haredim only. And he went to a Rebbe down in Jerusalem and asked for him to tell his flock to relocate en masse. And they have. And I think he's been selling these properties for like under 1 million shekel, 1.5 million shekel to the Haredim. And they're worth more. They're worth 2 million, 2.5 million, you know. When they're selling them, they're cashing in. But it's a Haredi-only kind of community. But the volume of properties that they're building there, it just blows you away. It's just incredibly amazing. Further down the road, there's another sort of area being built. It's sort of secular. And that's right by a football pitch, which I wouldn't want to live by that, because you can imagine what it's going to be like on a Shabbos. You know, the singing of because that's if they play on the football. I think they do play football on the Shabbos, but you know, the noise. I live by a football ground now in Birmingham City, and the noise and the parking, the inconvenience and everything. I wouldn't want to live by a football ground again. But I am down on the front row, downtown Tiveria. I'm literally about a 10-minute walk to the Rambam's Kever, 15-minute walk to the water. On my right of me, I've got Rabbi Chia Vabonim, and on the left of me, I've got the Ramchal and Rabbi Akiva, and I'm literally in the middle of them. Further down the road is Rabbi Meir, and there could be certain facilities, leisure facilities, could be greater. The secular basically complain that there's nothing to do. There's no bowling alleys, there's no cinemas, but the kids are bored and they're getting into mischief and that kind of thing. But when the good weather comes, they flock to the beach. There's queues of cars Erev Shabbos trying to get into the public beaches. And then when they manage to get in, and then they lock the gates, and they all pitch up their tents, and they get the barbecues out, they've got the music on, and they've got the kids running out the water, and they camp overnight, and they say that there's nothing to do. And I look at it and I say, you don't realise what you got, mate. What a wonderful thing for you to have peaceful leisure, family time, you know what I mean? These will be times and moments that the kids will remember for the rest of their lives. You remember the day when we used to go down to the beach with Mummy and Daddy and basically go in and out the water, and Daddy would make shashlik and what have you. You know, that's what they do. And I can't wait to do that. I really can't. I think the time's coming. And my next visit, I'm going to get one of those little silver metal barbecue things. I've already got me cold case, you know, my ice box, and I can't wait. I just can't wait. Anyway, this is my first attempt at making this video. I'm probably not going to be happy with it, but I'm going to remake it again once I've watched it, and Baruch Hashem, we'll all be there soon. Speak to you later. Bye.